going to talk about our next chapter that we're going to close the year with, which is going to be chapter 18, and this is about the industrial age. So I like this chapter because it talks about a lot of the things that being invented that we take for granted today, like telephones and airplanes and things like automobiles, cars, basically. I like that they start with this picture. If you look really closely, you'll see these are young kids, mostly all boys, and some men here. There's a few men, and these are coal miners. And coal is an ancient fossilized rock. It's carbon, basically, uh, from layers and layers of old decomposed matter. And under pressure and over time, it turns into something that will actually burn, and it'll burn really hot. And people use it to power steam. It burns hotter and a lot longer than wood, so people found that it was a really good energy source. And if you notice these people in here, these are kids, these are young boys. They don't have beards, they don't have mustaches, except a couple of them. And you'll notice, like this picture right here, this looks like a father and his son, and that was very common. Once a boy reached a certain age, he would be considered a man and would have to go to work and start earning money to provide for the family. And so the theme here is that the late 1800s was a great time of invention and advances in technology, and it really helped our country. If you look at the map, this looks just like the United States looks today, except for Alaska and Hawaii, the continental United States. If you look really closely at this map, it kind of shows you some of the industries and the way people were contributing to the economy. So make sure you check this out. Use all these kind of things. See what still remains today and what's different when you compare them. So let's go to the lesson one, and railroads lead the way. So the railroad, which is what some people call the train, um, was really important after the Civil War. People really discovered that they're very important to the not only defending the country and fighting a war, but also to the economy. And so that kind of started a trickle down of the economy of needing trains. And here's a locomotive. This is the water tank, and then there would be a firebox over here that would burn the water, and that steam would be captured in these things, and it would push what are called pistons that would then rotate wheels that had enough power to move hundreds of thousands of pounds of materials and cars and things. So here's some good statistics about how much rail was laid, and you'll see about 1860 there was 30,000 miles of track, which sounds like a whole lot. I mean, that goes around the world already. The world's only 25,000 miles around, and but by about 1900 there was 193,000 miles of tracks. And you guys have probably sang the song "I've Been Working on the Railroad" as little kids, and that's where it came from, because that was one of the main jobs that people could get if they didn't have any education. But if they had to have luck to work on the railroad, because it was actually a really dangerous job. And then here's one of my favorite stories: the legend of John Henry. And John Henry was a guy who worked with a hammer and a chisel in order to cut through rock, and that was one of their jobs. It was really dangerous, really hard work, and he challenged and beat a steam-powered hammer, but because he worked so hard, his heart gave out. It's kind of a legend. You can find probably an animated cartoon of that. I know Disney made a story of it. It's really beautiful, and they use a lot of good music and stuff. So combining the railroads, consolidation was a practice that of combining separate countries. And so if you had one railroad in one part of a state and then another part in another part of the state, another railroad there, they would sometimes join forces. They knew that if they joined forces, you could get materials cheaper, kind of like if you go to Costco and try to buy, a case of water versus going to the store and buying one water. You're going to pay a lot less per water if you buy a whole bunch of it. So these companies knew that by consolidating their capital, they could make a better profit because their operating costs were lower. And this gave rise to the railroad barons. Baron is a kind of a noble term from the old country, like in England. And a baron was somebody like Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was basically used his influence and his power to make a lot more money and to kind of control an industry like the railroad. And so you talk about James J. Hill, and these barons were sometimes seen as great men and sometimes seen as, terrible men. It kind of depends on your perspective. Great that they, did a lot of things to create jobs and combine and use their influence and their power to make our country better. But then, they also did kind of rip off people and were pretty ruthless when it came to business, putting smaller people out of business and things like that. Just and so it kind of depends on your perspective, how you would look at them. And so Collis Huntington, Leland Stanford, which Stanford University is named after, they worked together. Huntington, if you've ever heard of the Huntington Library or Huntington Beach, that name is pretty famous here in California. And this all comes from the railroads. Now, how did railroads aid economic growth? Well, the railroads charge money to carry things for other companies, and so they had a lot of power. They could say no to certain companies. Say, we're not going to carry your stuff unless you pay us a whole lot more money, or they definitely could influence a lot of things. And even then, the little people like us, we had to just kind of go with it. Whatever those guys said, that would influence our lives. If we lived at that time, how people would get a job or how they would get their goods and services to market, things like that. And so the first thing you need for a railroad is iron and steel in order to get the tracks to be laid. And eventually, the national rail system, they had to consolidate how big the gauge was. This is a term, standard gauge. 4 feet, 8.5 inches was the standard gauge. And what that meant was the width between the tracks. Some people would use 6 feet, some would use 4 feet, some would use 4 feet, 8.5 inches. And if you got one rail that was a different size and it met up with another rail of a different size, you would have to take all that stuff off the cart and put it onto one so you could go the rest of the way to your destination. So by consolidating or making it standard, that saved a lot of time and money and made things more efficient. And then technology, you had to have brakes on a train, otherwise it would just go crashing into things. So George Westinghouse created air brakes, and a man named Janney had car couplers where so you could put Eli H. Janney, so you could put the cars together to make big long trains. Gustavus Swift developed refrigerated railroad cars so you could ship meat and crops without spoiling. And George Pullman developed a sleeping car where you could, here's a great picture, where you had like kind of like bunk beds in there, but you could have a private little area, put your stuff up there, go to sleep here, and it was safe and private. So once these things were invented, the railroads acquired them and they started to compete with each other. One of the ways they did that was by offering rebates, which was to give people who sort of signed a contract. They would say, okay, we're always going to roll with you. They would give them a better price, kind of like being a member or something. They would get a discount, and that way they were guaranteeing business, and those other people were guaranteeing that their business would go smoother because they had a guarantee to transportation. And the secret agreement's called pools. It's almost like kind of like not a scam, but it was very organized, and it was a way to sort of secretly make extra money. And what it did was make sure that instead of competing with each other, the railroad companies worked together, and then they could charge whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted, and they can make sure that they were making tons and tons of money by just not trying to get in each other's way. Now, how did the railroads change America? Well, if you look at this map, you'll see the railways right here around Chicago, New York, and then coming across to San Francisco. And you had pretty big need for that much transportation because now the country had spread from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. And so what you have is how the railroads influenced everything, the people that had a big hand in it, some of the inventions that came with it. And let me go through some more of these pictures here. And if you've ever seen one of these old-timey trains, I mean, they're still around. They still work. They made them they built them to last, and they've been around for now hundreds of years, and they're still running. If you ever get a chance to ride on one, go for it. It's actually really fun. So anyway, make sure that you are looking at your workbook pages for Chapter 18, Lesson 1, and I will be posting this and other videos this week so that you guys can close out the year with this Chapter 18. All right, hope you guys are doing good. Stay safe. Stay home. Please stay out of trouble. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on right now, and you know it's very important times right now. So I hope you guys are watching the news and making sure that you understand what's going on out there. So, all right, have a good one.